Hey guys, what's going on? It's Ben here. I am back again today doing another video. Today I'm sort of going to be starting a mini series that is based around some of my personal favorite NBA seasons. So now just to give some sort of a background on this so you're a little more familiar, the point of this is I find having been an NBA fan for most of my life and going through like the history of the NBA, uh, you know, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s is mostly the eras I focus on. I mean, some obviously I know a decent amount, but the 70s and 60s as well. But I mainly focus on those eras and like I study different things like the players that were good in various seasons, the storylines of various seasons, and I think that certain seasons have very interesting. It sounds kind of like a movie or something, but certain seasons do have like interesting storylines. Like examples would be the first season LeBron went to Miami. That was like a huge storyline. When Durant went to Golden State, that was a huge storyline. And then like 2016 to 17, you had the James Harden versus Russell Westbrook like MVP debate going on. That was a storyline for that season. So what I mean by that is just like the season was really interesting and you wanted to pay attention to it and you were intrigued by what was going on. So basically, the point of this series is me talking about my favorite seasons as far as intrigue and what happened and the teams that were good and how entertaining it was and just things going on in the league. So this is going to be the first video in a series of a couple videos of me talking about my personal favorite NBA seasons. There's no particular order to how I'm doing these videos, but let's get started. So my first season that I have on here is the 2010 to 11 season. Uh, if you don't know already, the 2010 offseason was one of the biggest free agency summers ever. You had free agents on the market such as, of course, LeBron, Dwayne Wade, Chris Bosh, Dirk Nowitzki, Amari Stoudemire, Paul Pierce, Ray Allen, Joe Johnson, Carlos Boozer. Those were like the big free agents, I would say. So you had a lot of player mobility. Of course, Amari going to the Knicks, the big three forming in Miami, and then you had those other guys like Dirk, Ray Allen, and Pierce, and then Joe Johnson all re-signing with their teams, and then Carlos Boozer going to the Bulls. Along with this, some interesting storylines going on this season were Derrick Rose being the youngest MVP in NBA history, the Bulls kind of coming out of nowhere and becoming the one seed. I think the previous season they were the 8 seed, so that was quite a surprise because they were like a 500 team and then they jumped to a 62 win team. Of course, the main storyline of this season was the Heat and just everything about them. And seeing a little bit of it was based around Cleveland and how they would do post LeBron, but when everyone saw that they were bad, that sort of faded away. But really, just the intrigue was surrounding like, could LeBron win a championship? He had promised that they would win all these titles. Would they be able to live up to that hype? There was some really good. I remember specifically on Christmas Day, you had Lakers, the two-time defending champion Lakers, versus LeBron and the Heat, and everyone thought that that would be the finals matchup, and people were getting really hyped watching it. Um, but yeah, this season overall was really interesting, especially when you look at the playoffs and of course Dallas winning the title. That was really cool and a bit of a surprise. Maybe you might say an underdog story. I don't know how people would categorize that title, but probably one of the best title runs in history. The Mavs beating the let's see here, they beat the Lakers and then they beat the Thunder, and with the still with their big three of Westbrook, Harden, and Durant intact, and then they beat the Miami Heat's big three, so that's pretty impressive. Um, so that title run in and of itself makes this one of my favorite seasons. Just seeing basically the last time a team has won a title where you only had one star and then just a bunch of really good supporting teammates. Other interesting storylines of this season were the Dwight Howard Get Me Out of Orlando saga, basically started around this season where he was debating like should I stay or should I go? Basically, it didn't get to its hype until the next season, the lockout season, 2010 to 11, where he really was thinking about like, okay, I want to get out of here. But during the 2010 to 11 season, you just started to hear these rumblings, and it sort of started to become a story. Um, and so that was an interesting piece. I think something interesting as well was that basically you had a lot of parity. And what I mean by that is in each conference, I think you had a handful of teams that could have realistically won the title, which is, I think, something that didn't exist before that. Or, okay, it did exist before that, obviously, but it hasn't existed since, is what I meant to say. I misspoke. Nowadays, it feels like, maybe two or three teams could realistically win the title. But in this 2010 to 11 season, I'd say you basically had eight teams that people could see winning the title. In the East, I think the four teams were like Chicago as the one seed, they won 62 games. The Heat were second seed, they won 58. The Celtics won 56 games and were still in the mix. And then Orlando won 52, and Orlando had coming off of two consecutive 59 win seasons, and they um, went to the finals in 2009 and went to the conference finals in 2010. So they were still a pretty legitimate threat in the East at this point. Now, obviously, like after that, they started to fall off a little bit, but still in this season, they were considered a pretty um, formidable threat. And in the West, you had the Spurs who won 61 games, and then the Lakers and Dallas both won 57, and then you had the Thunder winning 55. So I think any of those teams could have been a legit threat to win the title. You had the young OKC team that people thought was like on the rise and not unstoppable, of course, but like there's just a certain sort of sense about that team, like man, they could go really far, and people would be surprised if they maybe like won the title easily, but if they were really challenged but still won the title, people weren't uh, super surprised about that possible outcome. Dallas was winning 57 games. People were like, they're having a good season. They'll probably lose in the second round to the Lakers, but we'll see. And then of course the Lakers and the Spurs were the normal threats that they are. Also, an interesting plot line that, or like storyline throughout the season that I forgot to bring up was Carmelo Anthony was traded mid-season from the Nuggets to the Knicks. Knicks got into the playoffs at 42 and 40. They were the sixth seed and faced the Celtics in the first round. Um, and the Knicks have been really good. And then when they acquired Carmelo Anthony, their production on court and their win totals kind of slacked off a bit. I think I believe they were like the five seed ahead of the Hawks and like on pace to win like 48, around 48 to 50 games. And then when Carmelo got there, um, because they had to trade away so much of their depth to acquire him, they were really top heavy. And then their like supporting players went from guys like Wilson Chandler, Danilo Gallinari, and Raymond Felton to like Chauncey Billups and like um, Ronaldo Balkman, who were like older guys. Who, of course, Billups was still somewhat useful, but at that point he was even falling off a bit. Um, but that was a really interesting storyline because people were like, okay, now the Knicks are going to be a superpower in the East, and of course that never really came to fruition, but it was an interesting storyline at the time. As far as the playoffs, you had some pretty good series. Let's see here. So the Memphis San Antonio series in the first round, the 8 seed upsetting the 1 seed, that was really interesting. I think, of course, that has only happened like I think 3 or 4 times in NBA history. So that occurring was very cool. Of course, the second round series between Dallas and the Lakers was pretty epic. Just to watch, it was really cool to see Dallas sweep the Lakers. It was sort of unprecedented, and really nobody had expected it whatsoever. In the West, you also had Memphis and Oklahoma City in the second round going to 7 games, which is really exciting because there was this sense around Memphis like, oh my gosh, they beat the 61 win team. Can they go to the Western Conference Finals and uh, upset Dallas there too if they beat Oklahoma City? Like, what's the ceiling for this team? Of course, they did lose in the second round, but there was just this sort of cool sense of momentum that was around that team that was really interesting. In the East, there weren't a ton of good series. Actually, some of the Heat series were kind of interesting, even though they weren't that close. They beat Boston in 5 games and they beat Chicago in 5 games, but they actually were interesting series to watch. I watched all of them, and some of the games, like the series was a little bit closer, I think, in both situations than it seemed like. I think um, the games were relatively close, some of them at least. Yeah, so just to look at some of the box scores for some of these. So when the Heat faced the Celtics in the second round, they won the first game by 9. They won the second game by 11. And then the next game Boston won in a blowout, but then the next game the Heat won by 8, and then the Heat won by 10. So basically, besides the one game the Celtics won, they were all pretty close games. And so it was a pretty entertaining series, even though it was 4-1. And then Heat Bulls, the Bulls blew out the Heat in game one, and then the Heat won by 10, Heat won by 11, Heat won by 8, and Heat won by 3. So still a pretty close series. Like none of the games besides the one that the Bulls won were blowouts. In that, like the score was always around 10 points or less in each of those series. So they were still pretty entertaining. Orlando actually got upset in the first round of the series against Atlanta, who basically had no business beating them, but Atlanta played really good defense, and basically that series was all about Atlanta's defense and the Orlando offense, like who was going to win that battle, because Orlando didn't have much of a defense and Atlanta didn't have much of an offense, so it was really the other side of the ball. Like if Orlando won their battle on offense versus if the Hawks won their battle on defense, and the Hawks won their battle on defense, so they advanced to the next round. But it was an interesting upset. Of course, the finals was pretty interesting between the Heat and the Mavericks. You had the game winner by Dirk in game two, and you had a very close game in game three as well, I believe. Let me check the box scores here. So game one of that series was decided by 8 points, game two by 2 points, game three by 2 points, game four by 3 points, game five by 9 points, and then game six by 10 points. So very close overall. You had three of the games decided by 3 points or less, a game by 8 points, a game by 9, and a game by 10, as I reiterate already. But very close, very entertaining series. And so basically, those are the reasons that I found this season very entertaining. The main one being the sense that like a bunch of different teams could win the title, because I just like that where you have a lot of different teams, like 8 or 9, who you could be like, yeah, they have a legit shot of winning it. Whereas I feel like now that isn't really the case in the NBA. There's really a lack of parity. Whereas I think this season was when the NBA had one of its best seasons of parity, where okay, team 1 through team 30, where they're like, was every team pretty decent? No. But like for the teams that were in the playoffs, were there 8 or 9 that had legit shots of going far? Yes, and I think that is what we need in the NBA. And so that being said, this is one of my favorite seasons. Uh, Feel free to comment below if you guys have a favorite season and tell me why it's one of your favorites. Hope you guys have a good day, enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time. Bye.